Well, it really starts with being clear that we have a failed economic system. Now, we've seen very dramatically the consequences of the financial failure. But what we're not talking about is the connection to the environmental failure, the destruction of Earth's living systems, and the social failure of an economic system that by its very design, particularly as manifest in Wall Street, is designed to increase inequality. You know, having worked in international development for many years, I'm very familiar with the argument that the way to deal with poverty is to, through economic growth, to bring up the bottom. But of course what we see, and we've seen this for decades, is that in fact the economic growth tends to raise the top and depress the bottom. Now, part of it's coming to terms with the fact that we live on a finite planet. We've got finite resources, and the question is, what are our economic priorities? How do we allocate those resources? And it requires a fundamentally different approach to the economy, evaluating economic performance by the things that we really want in terms of human and natural well-being, rather than a system that is purely designed to increase financial returns to the already very wealthy.
Your book's subtitle, From Phantom Wealth to Real Wealth. What is phantom wealth?
Yeah, this is part of understanding the current Wall Street system, which is built around an illusion, the illusion that money is wealth, which then translates into the idea that people who are creating or who are making money are in fact creating wealth. And what Wall Street has become extremely expert at is creating money out of nothing through financial bubbles, through pyramiding lending to create fictitious assets that become collateral for more bank lending, and then combining that with the predatory aspects of usurious lending and deceptive lending and the use of credit cards as a substitute for a living wage, all the games that Wall Street is playing. And it's actually based on a philosophy that says we don't need to produce anything as a country if we can, if we can do all this financial innovation that allows us to create financial assets without producing anything of real value. I mean, it's absolutely insane. And yet it's been the foundation of our economic policy in this country for decades now.
You have spent your life focusing on issues of sustainability. You talk about excess consumption. What is the model that you could see right now? What is the model that we have right now, and what is the one you want to see built?
Yeah. Well, the amazing thing is that our system is built on driving increased consumption, but particularly it is driving the most destructive and wasteful forms of consumption, of course, starting with war, moving on to automobile dependence, and which is not just about the energy issue, but it's about the fragmentation of society as we move out into the suburbs. It's about the breakdown of the family as we put more and more stress on the family. So you have to have 2 or more people in the household working at more than one job each just to keep the household together, which means the children are without caretakers and so forth. You begin to put this all together. You say, well, if we began to really organize our economic activities around the things that really matter, we'd be looking at things, well, how do we organize our economy so that it actually builds human relationships, so it supports families, so it creates an environment in which our children can grow up both physically and psychologically healthy? And we'd begin to say, well, first of all, it'd be a good idea to end war. And of course, most of our wars are about competition for resources to maintain our wasteful lifestyle. So let's really get serious about world peace. Then we've got to start reducing our dependence on automobiles and recognize that rather than re-employing auto workers and making automobiles, we should be employing them in building bicycles, building public transportation, and so forth, all the things we need. Instead of investing massively in advertising, redirect those creative communications resources to education. You begin to see in almost every aspect of our economy the opportunity to redirect resources in ways that actually increase our well-being. They're not about sacrifice ultimately, and bringing ourselves into balance with one another and with Earth.
A few days ago in his is in his inaugural speech, President Obama, in the only reference he made to the market, he said something to the effect that government, without the watchful eye of government, the market can sometimes spin out of control. But that basically reaffirming our markets and our system as the best to offer for the world. Your sense of his response, given the nature of the crisis you think we face right now?
Well, it's always hard to tell exactly what that translates into, but I think the bottom line of what he's saying is that for a market to function efficiently in the service of society, it has to operate within a framework of rules. And it's interesting, you know, by my understanding of real market economics, that's a fundamental part of market efficiency. Now, of course, what we've been driven by is an economic ideology that claims to be a market theory, but in fact is anti-market. Because what happens if you try to operate a market without rules, you get this consolidation of power, the disconnect of financial power from the real economy of real people and real goods and services, and you develop a totally extractive economy. You know, theoretically in economics, economists talk about markets as a range from the purely competitive market, which, you know, the kind of model would be the farmer's market, like down here at Union Square, where I used to live. At the other end is the purely monopolistic or monopoly market, which has none of the beneficial features of the perfect competition. But they say, well, because the perfect competition works really well, you know, the market economy is the way to go. I mean, basically, we need to realize we've been told that there are only two economic models. One is the capitalist model, and the other is the communist or socialist model. One, capitalists own everything, and the other, the government runs everything. The real alternative is, in fact, a real market economy that looks a whole lot more like what Adam Smith had in mind, which looks more like a farmer's market. And I think, you know, we talk about Wall Street and Main Street, and really the solution is to rebuild a new economy based on Main Street, which means local businesses and people who are rooted in their community and working within a framework of community values and a set of public rules that enforce basic conditions of market efficiency.
Isn't part of the problem, as I hear you talk about even in the classical style of capitalism, we've seen a huge turn away. For instance, so much of our financial system now is in derivatives and credit default swaps and all of these unregulated and almost unknown aspects of the financial system. And then the rise in recent years of all of these private equity firms, at least in the classic corporation, there are shareholders and their boards of directors, and you have filings with the SEC, and you have some sort of transparency. But now with these private equity firms dominating so much of the investment, and with all of these off-the-books financial systems, you really have a system that no one even knows how deep the problem is.
That's absolutely right. And you know, the values have morphed further and further away from any kind of connection to or commitment to a larger public interest. And of course, underlying this is also this immoral philosophy that says if we each simply pursue our individual financial benefit, that this maximizes the benefit for the society. Now, that is about as corrupt a theory as one could imagine. We are seeing the consequences of it. And one of the things we have to break out of is to recognize that it's pragmatically flawed, it is morally flawed, that there is a community interest, and it beholds every one of us in every aspect of our life to recognize not only our personal interest, but also the collective interest, which means we've got to create a totally different economy around different institutions and different values.
Now, as people listen to you, David Korten, they might be saying, this is really pie in the sky. But it sounds like you're redefining it as apple pie in the sky, right, as patriotic.
It is patriotic, it's democratic.
You're saying that Wall Street can't be fixed. How do we replace it? lay out how the environment fits into this and exactly what you mean when you say, you know, families should be able to do things more together. How do people survive? Why is Main Street more real than Wall Street?
Well, because Wall Street is totally in the business of creating phantom wealth. You know, it goes back to one of the fundamentals that I realized when I was working in international development, and I began to wonder, why is it that the more developed the country gets, there's more and more people living in poverty? And it comes down to a very simple recognition. All the decisions that we make in official aid agencies are based on what will maximize the returns to money, which means to people who already have money. And people who don't have any money basically don't fit into the equation. And that's the way our whole economy, the whole Wall Street picture is defined. So the, you know, part of the shift is recognizing again that the whole concept of economic growth is flawed in terms of how we measure it. Because in fact, what economic growth really measures is the cost of producing whatever level of human well-being, health and well-being we have achieved. So in an economy that works, we would start assessing economic performance against indicators of the health of our children, of our families, of our communities, the health of our natural systems. And we would look at GDP as a measure of the cost of that attainment, so we would be trying to minimize GDP rather than maximize it as we organize economies that are really about, they're about building community. They are about providing people with meaningful jobs that give us a sense of personal meaning in our lives.
Give us an example.
Well, I mean, one of the interesting examples is the data that shows that people who shop in a farmer's market have 10 times the number of conversations of people who shop in a supermarket. And, you know, I know that from when I lived here in New York on Union Square, and I did most of my grocery shopping at the farmer's market. And yeah, you meet people and you talk and you meet your neighbors and you get acquainted with the farmer that grows your produce and so forth. And this is all about building relationships. And we have so monetized the economy, and, you know, a part of that process is monetizing relationships, and it diminishes our very humanity.